I feel that economics as a discipline is too deductive. We need to start by looking at what is going on the field first, and then we can start talking about hypothesis, theory, concept, and things like that. It's hard to help the young generation to be ready to face that kind of changes when they enter the market after they finish their study. The question is, of course, whether they are willing to do it or they are capable of doing it.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to our Triple IU Library Guest Podcast. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very distinguished guest, Professor Iwan Jaya Azis from Cornell University. And this special occasion, we will talk about the complexities of Indonesia macroeconomics and how it affected our poverty reduction, our poverty alleviation, and also the fact of inequality or poverty gap in Indonesia. And Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, no further ado, thank you very much for your time with us today, because yesterday we already have a very intense discussion about the global economic landscape, and I'm sure that you have a very interesting experience, because in the span of more than 50 years maybe in economics field, I suppose you have many intriguing offering other than becoming academic. And maybe you can share your story. Why do you still in this field as academic, as a scholar?
Well, it's a very simple fact that everybody wants to do what they love to do. And I happens to love doing academic work, both research as well as teaching. So I think there is nothing complicated about it. It's just a matter of individual choice. And it so happened that my choice is to become an academic.
And how are the lessons perhaps you could give us for students and young scholars that have interest in academic to stay persistent in the field?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I hope many of the students and young generation in general understand that they are the future of Indonesia, because depending on their age and the level of education, in a matter of few years, they will become parts of the labor force. And in any economy, not just Indonesia, in any economy, the role of the labor force in making the prosperity for the nation is so important. And since most of the students will be part of that labor force, I hope they understand the strategic value or the strategic positions of their education at this moment. And this is the reasons why I'm always very happy if I can help in any way the efforts of any educational institutions to improve the quality as well as everything that they need to improve, just to prepare this young generation to be ready as a powerful labor force for Indonesia in the future.
Professor, I think it is a very important issue.
Yes.
Last time we have a discussion that you're mentioning how important the lecture to prepare us by teaching not only the I don't want to say obsolete, but maybe the ancient, the ancient economic theory to prepare the future kind of phenomenon or experience that for nowadays cannot be predicted. Can you share maybe a little experience from your journey?
Yeah,
about
it's a simple logic here. Economics, as part of social science, supposed to deal with the society, supposed to help the welfare of the society, right? And the social environment around the world has changed, gradually has changed. And in the last few years, actually, the change has been so rapid. So it doesn't make sense if social science are not keeping up with the change, what is going on in the society. By the way, it's not only in Indonesia, but globally. So from that standpoint, I think it's only logical to think about how the social science, including economics, needs to update and needs to really understand the contemporary changes that is happening in the society. Because without understanding that, it's very hard to help the young generation. Again, I like to come back to the young generation. It's hard to help the young generation to be ready to face that kind of changes when they enter the market after they finish their study. So it's to me it's pretty straightforward and simple logic that the teacher and the educational institution in general have to update the curriculum, the contents of the courses and so forth. So it's, again, this is pretty simple. It's nothing complicated about it. The question is, of course, whether they are willing to do it or they are capable of doing it.
So willingness and capability.
Yeah.
We talk about competency, Professor. I'm sorry, yesterday Ibu Ani, Ibu Sri Mulyani tell us that the hugest part of Indonesian fiscal policy is to invest in the human capital. Professor, can you share maybe an example? What's supposed to be done with this human capital development in Indonesia with the fiscal policy?
Okay, when we talk about human development, basically we are talking about human as a totality here, right? So most of the analysts, when they talk about human capital, they're thinking about the education, they're thinking about skill and everything. It's not enough. We also have to think about the health. If anything, the COVID, pandemic, it's a reminder to all of us that it's not enough you have power, it's not enough you have money, it's not enough you have knowledge. If you are sick, you cannot contribute anything to the society. The productivity of the economy will be zero. Maybe it's even negative because if you're sick, someone have to take care of you, and things like. So health it's very, very important, and yet too many times being neglected when we discuss about human capital. So I would say human capital consists of not only education and skill, but also health.
It means the health system that been developed in Indonesia for not sufficient, or how?
Well, I mean, it's very complex issue because like education, it's also complex, but health is also complex. It's not only something that, you have to think about what kind of policies and so forth, but also it matter of lifestyle. I mean, one of the things that I really enjoy and I feel that I learn a lot from traditional communities, which is spreading all over Indonesia, especially in Indonesia Timur. I mean, I learn a lot from them because their lifestyle is really an ideal lifestyle. For example, they never eat processed foods. So this is a healthy food that will affect their health conditions, right? So, it's a complex issue. It's not just a matter of policy, whether the government has done this or has not done that, but it's also a matter of lifestyle. And when we talk about lifestyle, we talk about tradition, we talk about culture, we talk about family and so forth. So it's a complex issue.
Yes, I agree, Professor. And you're mentioning, I think it is, we should underline that East Indonesia, they mostly of them didn't eat processing food, and by now we're facing the reality that the processing food is more cheaper than the harvested food. I mean the real food, and this is also how do we know about GDP of Indonesia that mostly affected by consumption?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of GDP. Maybe I'm minority among economists because, when I go to the field, talk to the people and so forth, I see there is a divergence between what the GDP data shows and their real life, day-to-day life and so forth. So I would prefer to look at, how they live, the sort of lifestyle, and how the relationship within the family, that matters a lot. And I think economists have to expand their knowledge to also include that sort of, observe environment in the field with the real people rather than talking about secondary data. Okay, so it's the way I see it is that I'm not saying that the GDP is useless. Of course not. We need to still use the GDP, but it's not sufficient. We have to combine with the real life situation. In general, I feel that economics as a discipline is too deductive. I think we need to start thinking about introducing the element of inductive component in economics, meaning that we need to start by looking at what is going on the field first, and then we can start talking about hypothesis, theory, concept, and things like that, rather than the other way around.
And that's one is a very challenging issue for our as economic professor. Do you think?
Challenging, but at the same time, a big opportunity, especially for developing countries. Because if we talk about development economics, to be honest, the actual development economics is taking place in developing countries. That's why I feel so blessed whenever I'm able to come back to Indonesia, because it gives me a great opportunity to go to the field, to talk to the people, because that's where development economics is. Not the textbook, not what the model shows you.
About how Indonesia as an emerging country joining the middle income country club based on the GDP.
This is the reason. In fact, there was a number of conferences. I remember there was one conference in Bangkok, I think. The presenter talked about middle income trap, using the concept of the GDP, under which range of per capita GDP that you are trapped and things like that. Again, I'm not saying that they are not important. They are important, but I think that is far from sufficient to really understand about the real middle income trap. Because to me, a trap is something with the negative connotations, right? Because nobody wants to be in trap, okay? So if we're really trying to increase the prosperity and the well-being of majority of the society. Again, I want to underline the word majority here, because you can improve the living condition of a minority, but I'm talking about the majority here. And when we talk about majority in developing countries like Indonesia, I'm sorry to say, most of them are still low-income groups. So when we are thinking about them, I think things will be different than what the kind of a standard economic thinking is usually taught in a classroom.
That's why, Professor, even though the global world acknowledged the strong macroeconomic development of Indonesia, we're still facing issue of the inequality gap that larger and larger in the last decade. I mean, the GD index are 0.42, 0.41, and also even though the poverty number is already deducted, but I mean, how can Indonesia, in your opinion, still in the middle income country and also resolving this gap in the situation of the majority are still under a standard of living?
Yeah, there are two things here. Number one is about the measure, because you mentioned what Gini index, per capita income, and so forth. I think at least, maybe not the ideal things, but at least a better measure. I would personally propose to use per capita consumption rather than per capita GDP. Just think about this. Let's pick any region, okay? Let's say all of a sudden there's a major factory, let's say mining factory, come to that region. I guarantee the next year the GDP will go up tremendously. But the question is the presence of that major company really raise the livelihood of the community in that region? How do you measure that? As I said, it's not ideal, but at least a better alternative is consumption. Because consumption is really the act of every individual in that region. Whereas GDP is measuring the total production in that region. So at least that's the easy starting point to change the measure of the welfare here. Now, on the issue of, despite the fact that there is a high growth, but the Gini index is also increasing, that is happening all over the world. I remember during my student days, when we talk about increased inequality, most of the examples are developing countries, but nowadays it's both developing as well as developed countries. So that is a global issue that needs to be tackled. But again, starting point to really understand the issue, try to change the measure first, because too many people are still using the measure of GDP, whether it's per capita, even, sometimes they they think that everything will be taken care of once you achieve high growth of the GDP. No, it's not.
So not directly as trickle-down effect.
If anything, it's trickle up.
Professor, would you please enlighten me? I'm sure that Indonesia is not only a country in this Asia region who are joining the middle income club. We know that Thailand, Malaysia already entering first. And how would you see the difference between Indonesia? Yesterday, Mr. President opening our Asian summit, Indonesia as the chairman of ASEAN, but it is Indonesia really do the leadership in the economic, in the other field in the ASEAN, or maybe something else?
My personal take is that it's always useful to make comparisons between countries, between us and neighboring countries. It's useful, but why and how it is useful? I think it's useful to learn the positive things that is happening in neighboring countries and try to avoid the negative things that is happening there. That's the way I see the importance of making comparison, because you cannot make a broad brush conclusion, Indonesia is better or Indonesia is worse compared to other countries, depending on what measures are you talking about. Okay, so it's important to make comparisons, but we need to also understand why. What is the important part of making comparison? As I said, the important part of it is we learn the success story as well as the failure story from neighboring countries, and then we try to act accordingly.
And in what field do you think that Indonesia having more opportunities other than country in the region?
Opportunity, well, it's quite easy. We are the richest. You're talking about ASEAN, right?
Yeah.
We are the richest in terms of natural resources, okay? And now this is a little bit controversial. In terms of the number, we have the potential. I'm underlying the word potential. In terms of the number of labor force, we have the largest number of labor force. But this is only potential. And that's why I always come back to the quality of the human capital. And that's where the issue of education, skill, health, and so forth matters. So it's not only the number, but natural resources definitely is up there on the top as the strength of Indonesia compared to the neighboring countries.
So, Professor, is it okay if I might saying that if we don't do improvement in this human capital, you said that in the health sector, in the tackling environmental issue, this potential can be huge risk, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just think about this. Okay. If you look at the latest census 2020, because the latest census is 2020, the number of millennials plus Z, Generation Z, is 100 million in Indonesia.
Our bonus of demographic.
Yeah, so if you look at the number of millennials and the Z generations, 100 millions. Now think about, they will be the one who will be major part of the labor force. If we are talking about Indonesia in the future, okay, they are the human capital. So I will put heavy emphasis on looking at how is their condition in terms of their health, in terms of their education, in terms of their skill and things like that. So it's common sense. If you're thinking about the future of Indonesia with all the potential, that we have, think about them. Think about this human capital. Don't think about my generation. We are the passe generations, but think about them, the young generation. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so supportive with any efforts to improve the education, the health condition, especially of the young generation, because they are the future.